Hey, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Thanks again for tuning us in. This is Aaron Bloxel with Matthew Balzer on B&B Hockey Talk as we continue our 31 teams in 31 days with the Minnesota Wild today. Lots of hockey players out of that wonderful state of Minnesota. So let's get right into it. There wasn't any major signings the last 24 hours in the NHL, so we're going to jump right into this team preview and talk about potential forward lines, their defense, which they got a lot of depth on. If only they had that defense healthy last year in the playoffs, I'm sure they might be trying to trash talk the Winnipeg Jet fans a little bit more. But let's jump into it. Matthew, let's take it away with our forwards.
All right. So the Wild have one of the best up-and-coming younger core in the NHL. The top line I have is Jason Zucker, Eric Staal, and Nino Niederreiter. Eric Staal had an absolutely amazing season for the Wild last year. 42 goals, 76 points during the season. And he's only making $3.5 million. So that's one of the best contracts in the NHL right now. Jason Zucker had a great breakout season. He had as he just got his new contract the other day, over 30 goals and 60 points. And Nino Niederreiter battled some injuries this past year, but when he's healthy, he's a really good power forward for them. The second line could also be potentially a first line for them, depending on how things go. And Zach Parise, Mikko Koivu, and Michael Granlund. The two Finns there, Koivu and Granlund, have had really good chemistry over the years. And Granlund, many years ago, was the noted player as the best player not playing in the NHL when he signed his entry-level deal. And has really come into his own. He had 67 points last year in 77 games. And Parise, when he was healthy, that's the biggest thing. Coming off the broken or fractured sternum, I believe, is what he had in the playoffs that he even played through a little bit, which is crazy to think. But he's supposed to be healthy for the start of the season, which is good for the Wild. The third line I was Jordan Greenway, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Charlie Coyle. Greenway joined them towards the end of the year when his college season ended and played in the playoffs for them. He's going to be a big power forward. He played for the U.S. at the World Juniors and was one of their notable players that played for them. Joel Eriksson Ek, I was expecting more from him in his rookie season, just because he had all that offensive upside in the year before, where he put up some points and then he went over to Sweden and then came back. But they used him more in a depth role, and he only had 16 points for the entire season. So I'm expecting to step up this year. And Charlie Coyle is a good depth player that can move up in the lineup if need be. And the fourth line I have is Marcus Foligno, Eric Fehr, and JT Brown. Fehr and Brown were brought in free agency. Fehr played most of the year in the American League before he was traded to San Jose at the trade deadline, and actually really found a good spot on that fourth line with the Sharks. And I'm expecting him to keep playing the way he did with the Sharks. And some more depth that they have. Matt Hendricks, who they also brought in free agency from the Winnipeg Jets, can be a good penalty killer for them and a fourth-line player. And Luke Kunin, who was a first-rounder for them in 2016, did start the season a little bit with them. He had 4 points in 19 games before he had a knee injury, and then he ended up playing most of the games in the minors when he came back.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm interested to see how Jordan Greenway transitioned since he only came in late last year. Played 6 games, like you said, prior to the playoffs. Right out of Boston University. The stuff that we saw from him, he played really well and has a lot of potential for impact. Now, the Wild are one of those teams that just get it done every year. They have, they just seem to have endless amounts of young talent that come up and play no matter how many injuries they get. But last year, obviously, they ran out of gas with Ryan Suter going down, and that defense just was so banged up from playing the Winnipeg Jets. Now, let's talk about the defense on this team. So they have the big two lines back there, and Ryan Suter and Jared Spurgeon, along with Jonas Brodin and Matt Dumba. And Matt Dumba, obviously, just with that huge contract. Those four are really solid defensemen. The next two spots are a little bit more up for grabs as they have 6 guys under NHL contract that all have NHL experience that are going to be pushing for it. So they have a young prospect named Nick Seeler that played a little bit for them last year. We'll touch on him here in a bit with our prospects review. Greg Paterno, Nate Prosser, Ryan Murphy, who of course had an outstanding breakout season about 3 years ago with the Carolina Hurricanes, has almost dropped off the map since, but he played 21 games last year. Free agent signing Matt Bartkowski out of the Calgary Flames organization, and of course Gustav Olofsson, who we both think will be on the starting 6 as he played 41 games last year with the Wild. So they got definitely some depth now. They got 10 NHL-ready defensemen that are ready to go. So what do you think of that decor before we get into goaltending?
Yeah, that top 4 is really good. Like Suter gained injured and finished for the year towards the end of the year. It was really tough, and that isn't the first time that's happened to Suter too with the Wild, which sucks when you're that close to getting into the playoffs and then your top defenseman goes down for the year with a season-ending injury. But him and Jared Spurgeon, I think, is a very underrated defenseman. He's only about like 5'9" or something like that. But he had 37 points in 61 games and has really fit in well with Suter because they tried Brodin and some lefties on his right side, but he really pushed for having a right-handed defenseman playing with him, and Spurgeon has fit in the best there. And Dumba, 50-point season last year, continues to get better and better. And then Greg Paterno, who they brought in for free agency from Dallas, I think will really help solidify that bottom pairing with some good defensive play.
Excellent. Why don't you bring us into the goaltending, as they have at least their third-string goaltender they brought in as a depth move.
All right. So the Devan Dubnyk will be back between the pipes in the starting role. I've really liked his game ever since he transitioned from Edmonton and then through Arizona, where he really started getting back in his game when he really struggled between Nashville and Montreal, I believe, before moving to Minnesota. And he's always good for some stack the pad saves or poke checks, which I'm a big fan of with some old school goaltending. Their backup goalie will be Alex Stalock, who played 28 games for them, had a .500 record. I think Minnesota will be hoping that he can play a little bit better than he did last year to get Dubnyk some more rest. And the third stringer, White Rock native Andrew Hampden, the Hamburglar. He did have one really good game for Colorado in the playoffs when Varlamov and Bernier were both hurt. And he stood on his head for one game to keep Colorado in the series. But yeah, he's a guy with some NHL experience, and could even battle Stalock for that backup position possibly.
Excellent. Their goaltending, I think, is very underrated all the time. Dubnyk had a great season last year, and is one of the main reasons why Minnesota. I mean, they do play a certain way. They've always had that stigma about them. The old Jacques Lemaire hockey really adds that stigma to defense first, and they've all seemed to play that way. I mean, even you look at them through the history. I mean, they've got Parise there and guys from the New Jersey Devils system that were used to playing for Jacques Lemaire and stuff. So it's funny how they are. They have opened up things at least over the last few years, but their goaltending they still rely on, but they really give up very few shots. So we're going to get into the prospects now. A lot of these guys are going to probably stay in junior or with their current hockey club. A lot of them are going to be in the Iowa Wild down in the farm system, but I'll get us started off with a couple of players. So I'll go through a few, and then Matthew's going to go through a few of the ones we've talked about, along with a few extra ones. So let's talk about one of their This guy was a late round draft pick in 2015. He was actually in the 5th round. Kirill Kaprizov played in the KHL last year with CSKA Moscow. He ended up with 40 points in 46 games, and he's transitioning over, probably end up in Iowa, I think, this year, if he is indeed coming over to North America. We touched on Jordan Greenway already. He was a 2nd-round pick in 2015. Played in Boston University last year. Had 35 points in 36 games. Jumped over, did the Brock Besser, signed on with Minnesota, and ended up getting 1 point in 6 games. And then, like you said, had a great playoff in the 1st round. Defense prospect Louis Belpedio was a 3rd-round pick in 2014. Played for the Miami University last year in the NCAA. He had 30 points in 37 games. He played 1 game in the NHL for Minnesota last year and had 2 points. And then he ended up in Iowa for the remainder of the season, getting 2 points in 10 games. And definitely a depth guy. He has some potential to push for a spot, but with the amount of depth that they have there and that they signed, they'll likely keep him in Iowa just to help keep him developing. Now, for Dmitry Sokolov, a lot of people might have heard of him when he played for Russia at the World Juniors. Had a great World Junior. Another late-round pick. He was a 7th-rounder in 2016. Split the season last year between the Sudbury Wolves and the Barrie Colts in the OHL. And in only 64 games, he ended up with 96 points, an offensive threat for sure, and is looking like he's going to play in Iowa this year. I will throw it over to you to go through a few of yours now that you've got.
All right. So first of all, I'll touch on Kaprizov. I think this guy, whenever he does leave the KHL for North America, this guy can be the new Evgeny Kuznetsov, for the center for the Washington Capitals, who starred for them in the playoffs and has turned into a superstar in the NHL. Yeah, when he comes over, because Kuznetsov came in his early 20s, he took a little bit of a longer time to come to North America, and then as soon as he came, he has absolutely started ripping it up, and I think Kaprizov has that potential. Their top goalie prospect I have is Kaapo Kähkönen, another Finnish goalie. Those Finnish goalies, man, they just keep coming and coming. He was a 4th-round pick in 2014. He played in the Finnish Elite League there. He had a 20, 23, and 12 record, but he had a .920 save percentage and 6 shutouts. So I'm not sure if he's coming over to North America this year or if he'll spend another year in Europe. But with the numbers he's putting up, he could be pushing for the backup role in a few years. And another guy I have is Connor Dewar, who was a 3rd-round pick in this year's draft. He had 68 points, 38 goals in 68 games for Everett in the WHL, and had a really good playoffs with 12 goals and 26 points in 22 games. He'll take longer to develop just being in this year's draft. That's another name I have. And as I brought up earlier, Luke Kunin, along with Jordan Greenway, those two should be pushing for a spot on their opening night roster.
Just to throw in a couple of other names that we might have overlooked. Their 1st-round pick from this year, 2018, defenseman Philip Johansson. Definitely, what do you have on Philip Johansson?
Yeah, I believe he played in the Swedish 2nd league, I believe. So that, for the Canucks fans, that would be where Jonathan Dahlen played. He had 4 goals and 9 points in 29 games. But he's another defensive prospect that they have. You can sort of go along like with Jonas Brodin, who they have playing for them now, who has turned into a really good shutdown defenseman. He could potentially be another guy like that.
I'll throw in one more. Centerman Justin Kloos, who signed as a free agent in 2017 out of the University of Minnesota. He's played in 1 NHL game, but played in 76 games last year for the Iowa Wild with 50 points. Definitely has some potential and is a depth forward for them. Minnesota last year finished with 101 points. Obviously, that was good for third in that mighty Central Division. Where do you see them finishing this year? How many points do you think they'll pick up?
I think they'll have another good year. I have them between them and St. Louis for either being that third spot in the Central or that first wild card spot. It would be nice for Bruce Boudreau to finally get some playoff success between Washington and Minnesota. He's had all these great, amazing regular seasons year after year, but once when it comes to the playoffs, he still hasn't figured out how to push his team over the hump. But I believe they'll either be third or fourth in the West between the Central Division and the wild card spot.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see because obviously, a few injuries here and there could shift any team really in the standings just by a few points because of the parity nowadays in the league. But that's our team preview of the Minnesota Wild. We thank you so much for tuning us in. Remember to hit the like button, leave a comment for us, and hit the share button. We thank all those that liked and commented on our post on the Los Angeles Kings preview yesterday. Again, this is Aaron Bloxel with Matthew Balzer. Thanks so much for listening or watching wherever you may be. This is B&B Hockey Talk, and we will be back with you guys next Monday featuring our 31 teams in 31 days, the Montreal Canadiens. Have a very great weekend, everybody. We'll see you then.